My guest this week is JuliaMarie Woolbright, who has a fantastic conversion story from kind of a nominal atheist, kind of non-denominational Christian with a passion for the Bible, who found the Catholic faith, found answers in the Catholic faith she couldn't find in different denominations, different non-Catholic Christian churches who had different answers for kind of everything. And embraces the Catholic faith. That's the first part of her story. The second part of her story is kind of a reconversion when her daughter in utero is diagnosed with anencephaly, a life-threatening condition, which means that she'll be born but won't live very long or at all, and how she wrestles with that kind of first diagnosis and then walks through that journey with her daughter, all the way now to sainthood in heaven. It's an amazing, captivating story that I think you will absolutely love. I hope you do. Please watch and enjoy. Hey friends, welcome back to the show. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, hello, thank you for watching, guys. Please make sure you subscribe to this channel, interact in the comments, leave some feedback, let us know what you enjoy, questions you have, those kinds of things, and thank you for watching. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, please leave a rating or a review because that helps to push the podcast out to more listeners and expands the reach of these kinds of conversations. I am thrilled this week to be joined by JuliaMarie Woolbright. She's a Catholic convert living in the mountains of Western North Carolina with her husband and their 3 young sons. They recently lost their daughter Anastasia Louise to a neural tubal defect called I practice this, I know how to say this, I do, Anencephaly. Encouraging women to live authentically and boldly is her passion, and she loves deep, uncomfortable conversations about everything and anything, and doesn't mind the host who totally messes up her introduction. I'm sorry, JuliaMarie. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here, and hello.
Hello, Keith. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here, and don't worry about that word. It is tough. When they told us about it, it was like gesundheit. Like what even is that? So it takes, it's a mouthful. So
yeah. Wow. Well, thank you. That's wonderful. And I'm excited to have you on the show. I've followed you for a while. I don't know if you followed me for a long time, but I followed you for a while. We have some mutual friends on Instagram, and I've loved the things that you've posted. And I was really drawn into your journey when you first began posting about Anastasia and the news you were getting as things were unfolding. It was the way you guys walked through that, the challenges, the joys, the blessings, like that whole journey. I would load up Instagram in the morning just to see what where you guys were at, because it was just so captivating. And I don't know the right word to describe it, and we can dig into this later on in the show. I don't want to embarrass you in the beginning of the podcast, but it was such, the way you guys walked through an experience of infant loss, of having this child and choosing to, as the overwhelming majority of parents wouldn't, but choosing to walk that journey with her, faithfully, as loving Catholic parents. What was so inspiring and so just such an example of faithful, loving Catholic parents, and of the Catholic faith, and of suffering and grief and joy, and living out your faith. And I can't think of a more authentic and real way to do that when you're challenged like you guys were. But sorry to embarrass you off this top, but it was so inspiring. I can't even imagine the millions of people who will at some point be touched by that story, because I know just the multiplying effect of that. The people who are watching that and walking with you guys, and who we were. And we talked to our relatives about that, who had a child recently who has some medical complications. And so your story there, multiplies, and then they meet others, and that multiplies. And just that's amazing to me, that kind of power. So thank you for walking that journey and sharing it with us. It was amazing. I mean, I don't know the words I have.
Thank you for saying that, because there definitely was a point of, like, I would go to post. I'm like, gosh, does this look like I'm, trying to make like content out of my child, or is it, it's such a weird thing to be vulnerable online, because you don't want to seem like you're trying to, bring attention to yourself for the wrong reasons. But when you, at least in my experience, like when we found out about our daughter's condition, like when I Googled what anencephaly was, it was like, it was horrible. Like you just get all of these awful images, and I had to dig and spend hours to find uplifting stories and to find communities, like on Facebook or different things like that. And, it really just inspired me that, like, I want to show a different side to this condition. I want to show a different side to infant loss. And I was inspired by a lot of other women who've also walked this path and have been open about their losses as well. And when God gives you a gift, you can't keep it to yourself. You have to. Anastasia was such a gift. And it didn't seem right to just pretend like she didn't exist. Any other pregnancy, you would be posting your bump dates. You would be talking about your maternity pictures and all these things. It's like, what I wanted people to know was that just because she had a terminal diagnosis, that didn't make her any less worthy of that love and recognition that any child would normally get and deserves to have. So it was a blessing to be able to share her story. And again, the way her story has echoed through our local community, the online community, the Catholic world is a whole, or at least, how we say the Catholic world is so small. It's like everybody, it's like a 6 degrees of separation situation. It's like, you just never know how things are going to touch someone. And it means a lot to hear people still talking about her and remembering her and recalling her stories. So thank you. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. And thank you. You make it sound so casual and easy. Yeah, we shared this online. It was like, it was a gift. We shared it. That's not an easy thing to do. And you guys did it. That's amazing. That's such a blessing to all of us that you shared that. So thank you. So you have also a fantastic conversion story. So you're a Catholic convert. So what I want to do is hear that story. To unroll it. So I'll kind of get out of the way. You can kind of tell your story, go as far back as you want to go, and we'll go forward, and we'll stop maybe along the way or at the end and kind of dig into some of those details. We'll come back, I think, if there's time, of course, talk about a bit more of your infant loss journey, because there's much more to mind there, and especially from that perspective of Catholic convert. I think there's a lot in there that's really fascinating. So we'll definitely tip back around into that. But let's go back as far as you want to go. And what's your origin story?
Okay. So I was not raised in a church. My dad is an atheist. God to him was more of a weapon to be used, not actually a being, or somebody that expressed love. My mother, she raised us non-denominationally. Like we were homeschooled, so we had some other friends who were very, very Christian, and we got a lot of their like secondhand workbooks and things like that. So we were exposed to Christianity. We definitely, I remember sitting around the table, and I think we did this twice, where we were like, okay, like it's time to get saved. And we were like sitting around the dining room table, and we're all like crying. And I think about the second time that conversation happened, I remember thinking like, so do I have to just keep doing this? Like what? I didn't understand. My mother, she tried her very best. She is such a good woman, and she was really trying to just help us understand, like, Christianity is about loving Jesus. And so that was the message that I carried with me throughout my childhood. We didn't go to church. I remember we went once when I was like 7, and it was like a really great experience. I don't even remember. I think it might have been Methodist. I'm not really sure. So it was kind of like a core memory. Like I remember the music. There was like this song. It was "Can You Feel the Nails?" And like that, it was like permanently burned into my brain. But then after that, we didn't go for a long time. I had decided at about 14 to start reading the Bible. I read the Bible from front to back, for better or for worse. It was like, some nights, hey, I'm going to read this, then this is making a lot of sense. And then you hit like Deuteronomy or Numbers and you're like, oh, okay.
What was this?
But yeah, so that was kind of the extent of my faith. We did end up, as we got into our later teen years, my dad did let us go to, we lived near a state park in Georgia. So we would go down to the local campground, and they had what they called boat church, which was basically just a pavilion near the lake where different preachers would come in. And it was just, so there wasn't any consistency for me. There was, I was in a time in my life where I was really searching. I wanted answers. As my circle of friends grew and became more diverse, it was like, well, what about this thing that they brought up? Or what about that thing they brought up? And I don't have an answer for it, because literally every preacher who came through was giving me a different answer. And I got very frustrated with that. I tend to be, a dear priest friend of mine was like, you have a very all or nothing personality. Do you know that? And I'm like, yeah. I found out just recently it's the ADHD. I thought it was just a defect or something. And it's like, oh no, it's my brain. But yeah. So, and again, like my dad, we grew up in a difficult situation with him, and I got to a point where I just was like, I just couldn't understand. Like, I remember sitting on the floor at night with my flashlight, reading my Bible, and like thinking to myself, like, why am I doing this? Like, why does he not hear me? Like, I'm trying here. Like, I opened the book. I'm reading the words. Why am I not getting answers? Like, well, how can he watch me cry like every night and not hear me? And through that, like, not to just go way too deep into that, that's its own story. But long story short, I got to a point where I was like, you know what, to heck with this. I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't keep praying to a God who's not going to rescue us, who's not going to listen to us. And again, I think a lot of that too was I didn't have any kind of understanding of who God was, how faith works. I mean, it was just, okay, you're supposed to love Jesus. Well, great. I did that. This isn't working. And this is kind of going to tie back later, because there were a lot of parallels later on when we were going through our journey with Anastasia, that I had that moment of like, what the heck? I did the things. Why are you not answering my prayers? Anyway, but things with our family came to a head I think it was 2013. Yes, 2013. And it culminated in my parents finally divorcing. But in the meantime, there were child services. There was just all these different, my family dynamics were falling apart. People were having breakdowns left and right. And I found myself needing something to cling to, because it was like, okay, I'm out here like just in this sea with nothing to hold on to. Maybe let me try faith again, because this whole agnostic atheist thing I'm doing it's not working. If anything, I have more dread and more anxiety than I did before. So I was looking up churches, and I had been to a mass before, on Corpus Christi, actually, I think the year prior. Yeah, in 2012. And I remember I came back and my dad was like, well, how was it? And I was like, Dad, those Catholics are weird. Like, they're freaking strange. Like, there were statues everywhere. Everybody's talking at the same time. But I remember even in amongst all of the, like, what the heck is happening right now, there was still during the consecration, like, there was just this peace and this feeling of like, I have zero clue what's happening here, but everybody seems to really, like, everybody's quiet. Everybody is reverent. I don't know like, again, it's just, I'm watching it like something is going on. I don't get it, but it seems important. Well, I looked up all the local churches around. I was living with my grandparents at the time, and I could not bring myself to go back to another Protestant church. It was like, I cannot reconcile the idea of going to one church and getting one answer, going to another church and getting another answer. So I was like, you know what? There's a Catholic church a pretty short distance away. My grandfather was raised Catholic. He is since he's fallen away from the faith and has never practiced as long as I've been alive. But I was like, hey, Pop, can you take me to mass? So, and he did. It was a little bit of a shock, honestly. But yeah, so we went, and it was, I think, during the Christmas season. It may have been Advent. It was Christmas or Advent. I don't really remember the specific detail. Like, the life back then was just kind of fuzzy, but I remember going in. I did the motions. I knew I wasn't supposed to receive communion. Like, I stood when everybody stood. I knelt when everybody else knelt. And I remember sitting there in the pew. I couldn't tell you what the readings were. I couldn't tell you much about what was going on because I was so distracted by a statue of Our Lady of Grace sitting in the corner. And it occurred to me, like, her arms almost look like they're just out, like waiting, like she's waiting for a hug. Like she just wants to hug me. And I was like, oh, I've been in a Catholic church for like an hour, and I'm already thinking, I should hug that statue, or that statue looks like she's wanting a hug. And we moved into the consecration, and the priest said during the Eucharistic prayers that you never cease to gather a people to yourself. And that was my moment. It was just that line. And I broke down. It makes me teary just thinking about it today, because I was searching, and I was just so lost. And I remembered like sitting in that pew just moments before thinking, why in the hell am I here? What am I doing here? I don't need, like, I have no knowledge of Catholicism. I don't, like, my Italian family, they all are Catholic, but it was never like a big deal. And yeah, just that moment, it was just like, oh, that's why I'm here. That's why when I was searching for churches, this church popped up in my search. That was that prompting. He called me to himself. And then, like, I looked back at that statue of Our Lady and was like, oh, she's welcoming. That's that stance. That it's this stance of like, come here, let me bring you to my son. And it was like, at that moment, I was like, I don't care what I have to do. I don't care what it takes. I want to be Catholic. And maybe that all or nothing personality was coming in to serve me a little bit, because it was like the second I made up my mind, I was like, let's go. We're doing this. And the more I searched, and then like my best friend, she's also my godmother. She's like 2 years older than I am. So we grew up together, and she would talk about Catholicism. I remember specifically she was talking about the misconceptions that, we live in the Bible Belt, and anti-Catholic sentiments can run a little bit rampant. And I remember her saying, like, I would rather you cut out my heart than speak poorly of the Blessed Sacrament. And in that moment, I thought back to that conversation, and it was like, oh, so something is really, really special about whatever's going on that altar. And the second I learned what the Eucharist was, it was like, it was a no-brainer for me. It was like, oh, cool. Here's the scripture. Here's the thousands of years of church teaching. And she was like, hey, I've got this great book for you. It's called the Catechism. And it's like, a book of all the things we believe that I can just search through and get solid answers to. And no matter where I go, they're all going to be the same. Yes. And yeah. And it, honestly, the biggest thing was, I really didn't have too many sticking points. I had my usual, like, oh, but don't they worship Mary? What's the Immaculate Conception? Does that mean Mary's on the same level as Jesus? And, yeah, but it was just amazing to me how quickly it was like, oh, again, scripture, tradition. Cool. This all makes sense. Like, you could just look at it logically. And at a time in my life where nothing made sense, it was like, oh, thank goodness, there is some truth. There is something objective that I can cling to here. And yeah, it just from there I went and I actually, so again, it was Advent, Christmas time, somewhere in there. So I had to wait till the following September to start RCIA. So I had a really long time in between my moment where I decided to convert to even just starting the classes. Um, so I had, yeah, so many, many months of late nights reading absolutely everything I could. I spent a lot of time on Catholic Answers, um, just just reading everything I could get my hands on. Um, yeah, so it was funny. Now I work for Ascension Press, and I remember like in our CIA we did I lost the words. What is it? The a biblical walk through the mass. Um, to go through it, and I remember being like having my mind blown by Dr. Shree and his and just how he broke it all down and brought it all back to scripture. And then when I was in my interviews at Ascension, I started as a customer support rep, and they were like, "Are you familiar with us?" And I'm like, "I don't know, maybe." And they started like naming titles, and I was like, "Oh, I know that one, the one about the mass. I did that. I completed that course." Um, so yeah, so it's really funny to me now, like as I'm sitting here and I'm trying to recall it, like all these fun little callbacks, and ways that it all kind of came full circle, 10 years later. Um, but yeah, so it was RCIA was fun. I think a lot of converts could probably tell you some kind of story about how RCIA might have could have been better. But I'm really thankful. I had a lot of really great people around me that helped that just helped me keep away from people's opinions or bad teachers, just just different things. um I got really into canon law at that point. That was really fun. So it's like, oh, there's more books with objective answers to the things that I'm wondering about. Really, like that black and white, or not black and white. I would like to think I've grown a little past that. Maybe back then I look back on some of my zeal as a young Catholic and go, oh, I might have been a tad bit insufferable, but um, yeah. Anyway, I came into the church, the Easter Vigil on April 19th of 2014. I received all three sacraments of initiation. I was the only person actually in our parish that was getting baptized that year. So, which was kind of cool. It was like the music ministers were like, "We're gonna sing, or we're gonna chant the Litany of the Saints just for you," and it really like brought everything home. I remember, I wish I had pictures. I don't have like a single picture from my time coming into the church, but like I just remember getting baptized and just like I could just feel myself like glowing. I was like, I had never known what it felt like to glow before, but I was like, that moment, it was such a defining moment for me. Um, yeah, it's been a long 10 years. It's interesting to me. I think there was definitely a sense of like, I felt like I had to fight to become Catholic in a lot of different ways between, I'm the only Catholic in my immediate family. Again, my extended family were culturally Catholic, so it's a little different than somebody who like, or it's a different experience. Um, and there's, yeah, it just, I'm trying to think of where I'm going with this. Sorry, this is what I get for booking at 9 o'clock at night at the end of a long day. um, oh, well, yeah, okay, so that's where I was going with that. But I'm really glad you're going to be able to edit this. Um, but after I became Catholic, I was like, okay, that was I'm through the hard part. Like, this is going to be easy. I've got the sacraments now. I can go and, I can go to confession when I need to. I can receive Jesus. I've been, like longing for the Eucharist for so long. And then it was like, oh, this is hard. It's kind of like when you get married or before you hear about like, oh, the honeymoon period, or you might hear a generic like, oh, marriage is hard or being a parent is hard. But it's not until you like get in it that you're like, nobody told me this part. Nobody told me how hard it was going to be to follow all these rules that I loved when I wasn't actually beholden to them. Um, it's like, okay, now I'm in the club and now I was really thankful for our CIA in that regard. Like I love the fact that the church is like, no, you can't just come in and join. Like you need to understand what you're getting into. I feel like that's just, the church and her wisdom, um, but yeah, it just, and over the years, like I've up until the pandemic, I had really a lot of pride over the fact that I had never missed a mass. I'd never missed a Sunday obligation. Um, and then like COVID hit and it was like, I realized like, oh, I've got to I'm going to have to come to Jesus right now in this living room while I'm live streaming, the Easter vigil. Um, but yeah, so it's just, I feel like when you, like throughout my journey at least, there's just so many there have been so many highs and lows. There was definitely like the high of, okay, I'm here, I've done the things, like I finished the race, and then you realize, oh no, I have the rest of my life to do this. And and then there's times where it's like, well, why did I pick this religion again? There's so many rules, there's so much I have to think about, so many things that I have to defend. And as that like zeal kind of wore off, it's easy to get complacent. And I think when I was pregnant with Anastasia, there was a point, I was at a point um, of complacency, going through the motions. And it was kind of shocking to realize that I was in that place, because it's like, man, so many times I would like look back at myself and I'm like, what happened to that girl who just was on fire and wanted to talk about apologetics all the time? What happened to, me wanting to like, take a bullet for the Blessed Sacrament if I could? It's like, it just, I think that if there's anything I could tell somebody who is interested in becoming Catholic, it's like, just don't expect it to be easy. It's worth it, but just don't be shocked when you find those feelings fade away. It's very much like being in a relationship. It's very, it is. That's something I've had to learn too, is like, I think I approached even Catholicism with a very almost transactional mindset. I follow the rules. You give me what I want. You give me the grace, and if I suffer, then I get rewarded for the suffering. And there wasn't a lot of relationship. And I think it kind of comes back to, how I was raised too, where, God wasn't somebody that we loved and loved us. He was like the overlord in the sky that we had to make happy, or else, he would do bad things and send us to hell. So over this past year, I think my biggest, I've almost had like a second conversion in a lot of ways. And it's like I said, there's no way to talk at this point. It's interesting how this little human who has existed for like less than a year has become so entwined with not only who I am as a person, but who I am as a follower of Christ. And yeah, so it's like, to talk about my conversion story, it's like, oh, I have to talk about Anastasia, because she brought me back home, even though I was already there. But she brought the faith alive to me in a way that I just was never able to see before. I remember I hope it's okay, I'm just kind of going into this part because I don't really have a whole lot more. Like, that was basically it for the conversion story. Anastasia was our girl name from the get-go. When my husband and I, when we were first married, we had switched parishes from the parish that I was baptized in to the next town over. and we had a wonderful priest. He actually showed up at Anastasia's funeral. He didn't tell us he was coming. He stepped out, and I smiled through her whole funeral. There were 2 moments where I teared up, and it was when he stepped out of the sacristy and surprised us with being there. And part of that was because when we were first married, we were going through the Eucharistic prayer, and he was, he was doing the little litany during the longer Eucharistic prayer. And as he got to, Agnes, Cecilia, Anastasia, and when I heard the name Anastasia, it was like I got hit by lightning. Like I had this gut feeling. I was like, it was clear as day to me. I am going to have a daughter. Her name will be Anastasia. And shortly after that, I got pregnant with a boy. And then I got pregnant again with a boy. And a third time with what I thought was a girl, because I had a test that told me that it was a girl. Went through my whole first trimester, and then I did a blood test, and they were like, "Hey, do you want to know what you're having?" And I'm like, "Sure." And it was a boy. So yeah, that was fun. I had to explain to my 3-year-old at that point. He was like, we're very into Jane Austen in our house. So he had like turned on some classical music on our little Bluetooth speaker. And he was like, "Mama, let's dance like they do in Pride and Prejudice." And we're dancing around the living room. And he's like, "You were really sad that Anastasia turned out to be a boy. Does that mean you were sad when Anthony and I were boys too?" You're 3. I'm not having this conversation. Side tangent. No, so anyway, every child we have had at some point was going to be Anastasia Louise. So when I finally did get pregnant with Anastasia, and I was so sick. I was so sick. And my mom, I was talking to her one day, and she was like, "You do know you have a little girl in there, right?" Like, "I'm thinking you're right. This doesn't feel the same way as my other pregnancies have." And sure enough, we finally got our girl. And not that we were trying for a girl, but there was a sense of like, after the third boy, I was like, maybe I was just crazy. Maybe that wasn't like a God moment. Maybe it was just me saying, "Hey, I like that name." But it was a conviction. So I'm like, I don't feel like I would have had that strong of a feeling over, "Oh, I like a name. That's nice. It was a great movie." Here. Sorry. I was like trying to think, should I elaborate on that? But yeah, so when we found out, like, because we had their first ultrasound, everything looked great. Only now in hindsight, I could look back and see like, oh, something was not quite the same about her head in comparison to like, and when you go in for that first ultrasound and they look like little gummy bears floating around at like 8 weeks. But you could see that her head was a little like wavy almost at the top, but it wasn't obvious enough. It could have been the angle. But when my husband was out of town for work when I got the email that said that something was wrong. And the email said spina bifida. So I went the whole weekend. This was like at 1:00 in the morning. I get the email from LabCorp, and then the midwife that I was seeing called me the next day and was like, "I'm so sorry you got those results. They were not supposed to be sent to you, but we do need you to come in or go to the nearest city. It's about an hour away from us, and go get a level 2 ultrasound." And they were thankfully able to get me in that Monday. So I spent the whole weekend thinking like, okay, like, what are we going to do? Our house isn't handicap accessible. If she's in a wheelchair? Like, what is this going to, how are we going to do this? But there was never even at that point, obviously there's no doubt. Like there were no other options other than we were going to love this baby and do whatever we could to make her life the best it could possibly be. So when we went in for the ultrasound, they showed us, the first thing we saw was her spine, and it was perfect. And I was like, okay, everything's fine. Like, look, her spine is great. They showed us everything. She was growing right on track. And she was like, "Hey, do you want to see anything else?" And I was like, "Well, what about her profile? What about her face?" Like, that's normally the first thing they want you to see is that like cute little, 20-week profile. And that's when the nurse, or not the nurse, the ultrasound tech turned to us and said, there's a problem. And she was like, you probably have not heard of this, but she has a condition called anencephaly. And at that point, she said she is not compatible. This is a condition that is not compatible with life. And I just felt my whole world come apart. Like, I went in there thinking, oh, I'm going to have to find a way to, parent 3 small children. My boys are 6, 4, and 2. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to, I'm already overwhelmed with these 3 boys. Like, and now I'm going to have to readjust our lives and, do all these different things. And then it's like, oh, by the way, she's not going to live. And thankfully they were so great there. They didn't they told us most times when people get this news, they choose to end the pregnancy here. We both immediately, my husband and I were like, no, not an option, not going to happen. And they were like, okay, great. That's awesome that you guys know what you want. And, we're going to support you in any way we can. And I mean, at that point, there really wasn't much else that they could say or do. I was totally healthy. She was perfectly healthy aside from her condition. So we just headed on home, and we called a dear priest friend of ours, and he just, because we were talking about what about baptizing her? What about trying to get a plan in place, because we didn't, after the appointment, they were like, she could come today. She could come at 9 months. We don't know. She could die in utero. So just trying to think of, it's one thing I don't play with is baptizing my kids. I'm like, it's been the running joke my entire time since of having children is if I could have a baptismal font in the delivery room, I would. And Anastasia was my baby that got me a baptism in the delivery room. So it was like, look at her. She's already trying to be mama's favorite. It's like when you grow up and when I realized the reality of, and the regenerative nature of baptism, and realizing holy crap, I went 19 years or 20 or almost, no, 20 years not being baptized. And it was like, oh, it's, that reality hits you. And it's like, okay, I want my babies to be baptized as soon as possible. I'm not gonna play Russian roulette with their souls. Which my husband, he teases me all the time. He's like, that's not how mercy works. And I'm like, shh. I still have a little bit of zealot in me. It's going to come out when it comes to baptizing my babies. Dang it. But anyway, so we stopped and we saw our midwife, and we were able to have our care with her. We decided then and there, we're going to continue care with the midwife who has been with us through all of our pregnancies. She helped deliver our last 2 babies. And then on the way home, we were passing by our parish, and I was like, hey, can we just go? I just need to go sit in the church for a bit. And thankfully, it was just totally empty. So I was able to just walk in, and I plopped down in front of the altar, and I just sat there. I was so angry. I just was sobbing and was like, I stood in this pew over here when you told me you were going to give me this daughter named Anastasia, and you are going to take her away from me. How freaking dare you? Who do you think you are? God or something? I didn't quite have that humor about it, but, and I just was thinking why? I've done, I got married in the church. I've baptized my babies. I've brought them to mass every Sunday. I've done everything right. Why are you doing this to me? And my brain it went blank. And I just had this very clear thought. I've made you the mother of a saint. Yeah. And that was just that was my turning point. It was my tears just dried instantly. It was okay, message received. I've got it. We came home, and my mother-in-law had been watching our boys, and I was able to smile, and we were walking around. We had to go grocery shopping afterwards, after we finished up at church. And, we were joking around and being able to find the joy and the humor in the situation. And that carried me through so much of it. And it gave me just such a clear view of what my vocation is. Cause I not only was I was very complacent in my faith, but also just very complacent in my vocation as a wife and a mother. It's so easy to get wrapped up in, I'm just a very selfish person. I'm not even gonna lie. I really struggle with self-sacrifice. It is not my bag. But, and it's very easy in our society to look at, you only have to be on social media for 10 seconds to see something about like how your kids are terrible and your husband's an idiot. And moms don't get any time to yourself. You're dead at the bottom of the stairs and the kids are still like, hey mom, can I have a snack? It's accurate. It's absolutely accurate. But it's easy to, be thinking, to have these thoughts of like, well, what is motherhood doing for me here? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, I've sacrificed everything and these kids don't even appreciate it. And, what if they grow up and they just become jerks and just all these different thoughts. And then like Anastasia and that moment with God, like really showed me like, this is why I'm doing this. It's not about making sure they're the smartest. It's not about making sure they're the perfect little altar servers or that they have the, perfect liturgical themed feast day or like name days or anything. That it's to get them to heaven. And this is my chance to do this for this little girl who's not going to have the opportunity to grow and to make mistakes and to do the things. It's like she got such a pass, really. It's like I didn't really deserve as her mother to have such an easy time getting her to heaven. It kind of feels like I cheated a little bit. It's like I have a saint in heaven and I didn't really have to do much besides love her like I do my other children. And there was a sense of like I did have to fight for her. I had to find courage that I knew I had to a degree because I did, again, have a lot of adversity that I had to go through to become Catholic. And I knew I was capable of standing up for what I believed in. But, there were people that were very much like, I don't know why you're doing this. You should just abort her. Like, yeah. she's not gonna live anyway. And just finding that strength to be like, no, excuse you. Like you will stop right this minute. And also just understanding the way that God loves us, even in our brokenness. Like, just because all of the, myself, my other kids, my husband, we do have the rest of our brains and our skulls, and we developed as we were intended to, that it doesn't make us any less broken. And that Anastasia in her brokenness was more whole than any of us could hope to be, or that we hope to be. We dream one day to be as whole as Anastasia is. And faith really just came alive for me through her and continues to. I just remember throughout the whole process, like all I prayed for was like, just please let her be born alive. Let me meet her. Let me baptize her. And even that, I was like, okay, God, that's it. And then I kept getting sent like these quotes of like, or I would see these quotes about, asking, like, you honor God by asking him for big things, or things of that, like, or reading scripture and seeing where like God wants us to turn to him and he wants us to wrestle with him and bring our struggles to him. And I spent a lot of time cussing at God. He and I had quite a few big conversations. And I think that was one of the most beautiful things about when she was actually born, was like, I got to have all my grief. I got to get a lot of that out prior. And for that, like, it was such a privilege. It really was. And I'm so thankful that we found out when we did. I'm thankful that we had the support system we did. Like, it was, people all the time will say like, oh, I can't imagine what you're going through. That must be so horrible. And it's like, yes, it's not a pain I would wish on my worst enemy, but if you can look for the goodness, if you can look and see if you allow yourself to look for where God is working in the situation, it becomes so much, it's beautiful in a way that you cannot describe. It was beautiful in the same way that me being lost and hearing that God was gathering me to himself was beautiful, and in the worst time of my life. And it brings me to my knees. Honestly, it's mind-blowing to see that goodness, and I keep thinking, like, I'm so honored and I'm so privileged that I got to walk with her. I was reading through, in preparation for this conversation, I was reading through my posts, trying to, because as people ask me how I'm doing, how I'm continuing to carry on. And it's like, it's harder than I imagined in some ways, but in other ways, it's so much easier than I could have ever dreamed. And I think a lot of that is grace. A lot of it is time to grieve, fabulous bereavement doulas. Again, going back to what to the communion of saints, going back to knowing that my child is in heaven, and that I know that she's more alive than I can hope to be. Like, it's so, again, she's working overtime up there. I know she is, just even since she passed away, like, the way it's almost like the grace has been, like, tangible, in so many ways. Even, like, we're hopefully expecting our rainbow baby in 2025. Actually, earlier today, I had a bit of a scare, and I'll be going to the doctor tomorrow to see if I could potentially be miscarrying. And even that, like, I'm just like, hey, Anastasia, like, could you say a prayer for your sibling? I don't know what's going on. But even when I put that post out there to announce the pregnancy, it just kind of felt like I wanted people to see that even if this pregnancy doesn't last, even if this child goes on to be with their sister, and just be with their Jesus, that their lives still brought joy and hope. And there's so much, and I don't think I would have been in that place if it weren't for Anastasia. I think I would have been absolutely destroyed at the very thought of having a miscarriage prior to her. But because of what I've learned from her about God and how he works, like, even there was even a moment today where I was like, really, like, you can't let us have anything nice. Like, there's no good, like, you can't. And it was like, it was such a quick little thought. And then it was like, JuliaMarie, that is not how God works. You know this. You know that it is not, it's not a matter of, God doesn't want you to be happy. He doesn't want you to have joy. Like, no, he wants you to have joy that surpasses understanding. And if you need proof of that, look at the pictures around your house of your baby. Look at like, I have her little hand and footprints, and I'll, like, just go touch them sometimes and just hold them. And it's like, she was our piece of heaven.
Yeah.
And she is our piece of heaven.
Yeah.
And just the grace and the joy we've had because of her has been truly beyond understanding. It's hard to even, like, put into words. That's probably why I'm rambling right now. But it just, there's no way to describe it. It's just, and that is and that's joy that only God can give. And there's a part of me that's kind of ashamed that it took losing a child to find joy in Jesus. But at the same time, God knows us better than we know ourselves. He knew what my stubborn heart was going to need to help really deepen my relationship with him. And you can just see the different ways that this little life has made such an impact, not only on me and my husband and our sons, but again, on the community around us. Total strangers for, like, the week after she had passed away, I was like, or people would stop me and be like, "Oh, you're Anastasia's mom." And it was like such a privilege. They're talking about my baby. My baby mattered. Like this baby that, according to the statistics, like 83% of babies with anencephaly are terminated. It's like by most standards, like her life should have ended when I found out about her.
Yeah.
And to see where people were like, no, like she was so beautiful and like what a amazing child, and she was so strong, and it really, again, I keep looking back at it and I'm like, I don't get what I did to deserve this. I don't, but then it's like, oh, but that's not how God works. We don't, nobody deserves anything. He's just good, and he just is, and he knows what's best for us and he will bring about these amazing things, even in the worst circumstances, if we just let him.
Yeah.
It's
It's an amazing journey. I mean, an amazing story. I also don't have very many words to describe it as you do. I just think of the amazing multiplying effect of that journey, and the people, like you say, who are stopping in the street to say, "Hey, you're Anastasia's mom. Like we've heard your story." I think that's amazing, and I think too, just to the world, the non Catholic Christian world, the idea that she's a saint now in heaven, like that idea is radically opposed to much of Protestant Christianity. You say you're in the Bible Belt, right? And I'm thinking of, Protestant friends, family that we have, the people who would see and hear your story and hear the way you speak about her, somebody who's in heaven, who can pray for us, and to begin to see how people are inspired by that story, and to begin to see whether you have yet or will in the future miracles that are occurring, as a result of her prayers. I mean, that's going to be an amazing thing to continue to walk in that. And be like, she's, because you said before we began recording, the idea that so many people say to you, "Oh, well, you'll see her again in heaven." Like, yeah. Like that's beginning to get, and everyone says that, right? Christian, non-Christian, everyone. Yeah. That's a thing that people say when you lose somebody, whether it's an infant, a baby, or a loved one. That's what they always say, whether they believe in heaven or not. That's the go-to like cultural thing, right? And you're like, well, yeah, you're beginning to scratch the surface then of what we actually believe as Catholics, what that catechism that you found in love talks about, right? That actually, yes, we'll see her again in heaven, and actually she's active right now in heaven. I think that's an amazing, beautiful thing. Like that witness alone, the multiplying effect of that witness alone, just of you walking in that journey and sharing those things and people seeing that and hearing that. I mean, that, like you said before, that part of the Eucharistic prayer that drew you in, right? That God is drawing all of us in. Like that's what she's doing, right? That's what she was made to do, in a sense, right? In this story. I think that's amazing. Like what a dovetail to your own, journey. And that's what is being passed on here. I think that's amazing.
It feels amazing. And it's just, and again, there is just such a part of me that is in awe that that I got to be a part of her story. Like so I was going through the Instagram, and I was reading through the post that I wrote after we had her funeral. And I say this all the time, that I would do all of this again. It sounds like a cliche of like, oh, I would do anything for my babies. I would, but I truly would go and do every last bit of this again, just to live in a world where she exists. Yeah. Just that idea that, she is this unique, and see, I mean, I try to correct myself when I say was. Yeah. It's like, yes, her physical time on earth is gone, or like it's over, but she's more alive than we are right now. And that's like what I really love explaining to people, especially when they, say like, oh, you're going to see her again, and she still loves you, and she's going to meet you at the pearly gates and lead you to Jesus, which was really funny that somebody had said that, because I'd kind of had like this, I was having a moment of grief, and I had this like thought of getting to heaven and her walking up to me and taking my hand and putting my hand into Jesus's hand.
Whew.
It's like almost this like sense of like, Mom, I want you to meet someone. And it's just these, you know, you think of like, oh, God speaks, or I heard the Holy Spirit say this, and I'm learning that God, for me, at least in our relationship, he tends to like kind of knock me over the head with things. And it's like those little moments where like the part of me that was so rooted in like logic and during my atheistic days is like, well, you probably just could think this stuff up and you're just doing, you know, I could explain it away, but it's like, no, I'm going to have faith that this is God trying to show me the greater purpose here, that he wants nothing more than to reunite me with my daughter, to reunite my husband with his daughter, her brothers with their sister. That is the goal, that she now that she is, you know, in the fullness of glory, can say like, you know what, like I know why Mommy's crying, and I can make it, I can help it. I can do something about this. I like to think of her like watching things go down and being like tugging on Jesus's robe and being like, "Hi, can we do something?" Because if she's anything like me, she is not passive.
That does feel like your personality.
Yes, it's very much like a we don't. I feel like if she just even when she was in my womb, like she hated being touched like by anybody but me. Like if I was snuggling her brothers, she would like scoot as far away as like her little like space would allow, or she would like start fighting. A dear friend of mine, she and I, we actually had found out we were pregnant like a week apart, and our due dates were like a day apart. And she came and visited us in the hospital after Anastasia was born, and she was holding her, and her son was kicking at Anastasia because she had her like cradled up against her belly, and Anastasia was getting so frustrated. She's like, no, I do not want to be touched. I don't want to be poked by whatever is going on. She was blind and deaf, so like her sense of touch was so sharp. Like it one of the most beautiful things that I got to experience was like she could tell when it was me. And like even the night she died, she like she was running, like her body quit. I didn't quite realize it because it was 3 a.m. But like her hypothalamus gave out and she was not able to, her body wasn't regulating its temperature anymore. So she was just absorbing all of my heat. She kept having like these little apnea episodes. And I finally was able to get her in a position that she really liked in my arms. And I felt her body just relax, and she was able to finally go to sleep. And then I was able to go to sleep. And, you know, there's a part of me that wishes I had been awake for her last breath. But then the other part of me is like, she knew where she was. She knew she was where she wanted to be. And I have to take comfort in that. But yeah, she just from day one, she's always been feisty. She suffered no fools. I have a feeling that if she had lived this side of heaven, I probably would have had my hands full. It's kind of funny to think of that, like, oh, you know, I can say all these things about her, and it's like, oh, but if she were, you know, a toddler, I would be frustrated with her. I would be having those same moments. Even now, sometimes as I'm like trying to, you know, wrangle all of these boys and everybody is just jumping off of high things and destroying things and just being feral. And I'm like, sister, you left me down here. You abandoned me. I needed a little more estrogen in this house. No, but it's, yeah, I know she is. There's just been so many moments. It's like, yeah, you can feel it. We just signed a contract on a house. It'll be our first home, and it's 3 minutes away from the cemetery.
Wow.
It's literally like just a quick hop, skip, and a jump right to where our girl is. And the second we walked through the door, I got that same like gut feeling of like, this is home. this is it. And I think a big part of that was because like there was just this sense of, it felt like our girl was coming with us. Like we moved close. Like here was this like great house that was on top of being everything our family needed. It's also like the cemetery is right there. Yeah. And we can go see her whenever we want. I mean, we could do that now, but it's, you know what I mean? It's closer and it's easy to get to. And yeah, there's just all these little moments where I'm like, I see you, sister. I see you. Give Jesus a hug for me.
That's amazing. Wow. There's a lot of goosebumps in these stories. I think that's incredible. And I just think it's such a difficult but beautiful thing, that experience and the closeness you can still have, right? Mm-hmm. With her, with the saints, like live your life, right? Alongside her in heaven. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful perspective. Yeah, I don't have words. I mean, we have some family friends who have similar situations, who had infants who passed away. We have got to experience some bits of their life, get together with them in a cemetery on the anniversary, of their child's passing, and just the beauty of the fact that they're just still so close. Mm-hmm. And still bring people together. I mean, and we were, a bunch of young families with kids running around the cemetery. And there was like 20 kids just running around, jumping off. We tried to coach them not to, but they were anyway, jumping off graves and running around, like, and putting all the cool statues and stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's regular life just happening in the context of a cemetery where we're there to pray for and ask for the prayers, of this child who's passed away, who they're in heaven. And it's such a beautiful thing, and it's so countercultural in one aspect that I think is just so beautiful. Like that witness, like who's going to drive by a cemetery and see 20 kids running around and go, what are they doing? Like, right? But we're there living life and praying alongside the saint in heaven. I think those things are so beautiful. I think they're going to become more and more countercultural, especially when you say that, so many of children with this condition and many conditions like this, right, that you can discover in utero like that are terminated, those pregnancies. And those stories never reach the light of day in the vast overwhelming majority of those cases, right? Mm-hmm. I can even think of, we have relatives who have a child with Down syndrome, and they were told by the very first person who kind of did the very first assessment, like, oh, so you're going to terminate this, right? Was the kind of the default. And like, no, what, horrified that's becoming in a place where that's just the given default for so many, children with any kind of condition you can discover. Mm-hmm. Like, oh yeah, of course you want a complicated life with this child, right?
Right.
Why? Right? So that witness is so countercultural, and then to continue walking on that journey and living alongside that saint, right? With that saint, as like, as the Catholic Church does properly, right? The church isn't just us on earth, it's those in heaven, right? Those on their way to heaven, right? I think that's beautiful. It's such a beautiful witness, I think. And I hope and I know that so many people are impacted by those kinds of stories, drawn in by those kind of stories, right? What are those Catholics doing over there that's so compelling, right?
Exactly.
I think that's fabulous. I've heard dozens of stories of people who are drawn into the Catholic faith through natural family planning and through, because we're the last bastion of those who understand and articulate why contraception is not compatible with like a life mentality, like a Christian mentality, right? So many people who have been converted to Catholicism through that, of all things, right?
Right.
But how many more are drawn in by beautiful stories like this, right? Who have lost somebody or are walking through that grief process and encounter stories like this, or see 20 kids running around a cemetery, and
Right.
go, what are they doing? Those are, I'm rambling now. Now it's my turn to ramble, maybe, but those are compelling stories, I think. Compelling things that are going to draw people in, gather people in. There's full circle again, right? To the beauty of the Catholic faith. I think that's amazing.
It really is. I think obviously I would love if Anastasia's story brought people to the faith. But something else I really want people, just going back to what you said about like how when a baby is diagnosed with something in utero, like how termination is the default. And it's baffling to me because we live in a society that is so, like, the emphasis is on inclusion. Like, we're supposed to be loving and charitable and like accepting of everyone. But then it's like, oh, but this person isn't perfect and they happen to not be outside the womb yet. So it's totally okay to just end their lives. And it's like the eugenics of it all. It's like totally different soapbox. I'm not going to get to it, but
I hear
but
you.
the number of, but also the number of people, the number of comments I get that I don't know how you did that. I could never have done that. I could not. You're so brave. Like, I don't. There's just this. If there's another thing that I really want people to understand, even if it's completely outside of Catholicism, is I wanted to share Anastasia's story because I wanted to show people that you can do this. Yeah. I'm not anything special. I'm not some great person that is selfless and able to just look at all the great things. I'm a human too. I got mad at God. He got quite a few, again, he caught quite a few cussings from me. I've ranted and raved and cried and had all the feelings. But it's worth it for this life. It's worth it to know that we did the best we could for our children. And I want people to know, like, you are strong enough to love your baby no matter what happens. And it's really sad to me that in this culture of that preaches tolerance and acceptance, that it's acceptable to look at someone who is less than perfect and say that, they can be othered. They can be, and not even just othered, that they're better off dead.
Yeah.
Because I looked back at what I wrote too. I'm quoting myself now, but I think I stand by it. It's like when I was talking, I had a post where I was talking about the statistics and how I was scared of that I was going to be afraid of my own child, or that I would be horrified by her appearance, and how quickly that changed when I allowed myself to see her as what she was, my daughter, my baby, not a monster, not a statistic, not someone with anencephaly, not someone better off dead, but my baby.
Yeah.
And that changed everything.
That's fantastic. That's a soapbox worth getting up on, I think. Thank you. That's amazing. This has been an awesome conversation. I hope inspiring to many, many people. I know this is, I can only go so far and not begin to break down in tears and these kind of journeys. It's inspiring to me. So hopefully others are equally inspired. And thank you for sharing it. I can put links to anything you want in the show notes for this show. I think your Instagram probably is a good place to start.
Yes.
Like I said,
yes.
I've been just captivated following you, even before this journey. You post good stuff on there. So
thank you.
It's great. So I link to that. Anywhere else you want to point people towards that you're doing, or you're involved with, or you've written, or anything that you think is worth pointing towards?
I do have a very neglected blog. It's musingsofaCatholicMama.com. I'm hoping to resurrect it at some point. Maybe I would like to start writing Anastasia's like full birth story there. But I feel like Instagram is where I'm mostly at these days. It's where I have it's easy enough to get on there, in the midst of busy daily life. feels kind of shallow. I also run a nail page with a Catholic twist at Stella Morris Nail Co. on Instagram. I like to do liturgical themed nails in my abundant spare time, but yeah, but for the musings, it's musings of a Catholic mama.
That's awesome. I'll put links to both those places and everything you've listed there in the show notes. JuliaMarie, thank you for being here. This was an awesome conversation. Thank you for the work, the witness that you have for the church, and thanks. I want to say God bless you guys, and the work you are doing in raising your kids.
Thank you.
And sharing it and musing. It's awesome. And thanks for being here. This has been awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Keith. This was really fun. I'm really glad that we got to connect. Thank you.
I'm very glad. Thank you.
Okay, take care.